Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. This is McNeil Entertainment, and before we actually begin this video, smash that subscribe button, hit the like button, and don't forget to turn on that notification bell so you never miss any of my content. I know I actually have done this video before, but today, this is actually going to be one of pretty much the final time I'm going to be visiting this webpage, the Political Compass Test. And today, we are actually truthfully going to be looking into my political compass test results, and we are going to be seeing deep down on where I actually stand. Well, yes, these questions were they're not really questions, but they're propositions, statements, so they're going to be a little biased. So, yeah. I actually did take the time to research using Google AI and such to actually figure out on what they mean. But let's begin. A few propositions to start with, concerning, no less, how you see the country and the world. If economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interests of transnational corporations. In simplest terms that can be understood, global free trade, if it's inevitable, should serve humanity rather than big business. Well, I want to partially agree, but it's nuanced if you actually do think about it, because how would such companies be getting paid? And how would they be getting paid? How would the workers themselves be getting paid as well? And how about job security? Because we also need to focus on job security, especially here in the United States. So I'm going to go with a strongly disagree, if it's mostly to protect the workers and their jobs, and to make sure that the businesses are actually getting what they need, especially in order to pay the workers and also to pay the suppliers as well. I'd always support my country, whether it was right or wrong. Technically, I would have actually agreed, and partially strongly agreed. However, the one thing I've actually paid attention to during the first Trump presidency, the Biden administration presidency, and the current Trump presidency, and even during as a child, during the Obama administration and the Bush presidency, I was way too young to even know about the Clinton administration. But in terms of always supporting my country, well, for the values and such, yes, I would actually agree. But if this is focusing more on I'd always support my country, as in always supporting my country's government, I would actually have to disagree. Kind of wish if there was a neutral option, because it's a 50-50. However, it does state whether it was right or wrong. It really depends on what it is. But if it's a nuanced way of saying I'd always support my country's government, whether what they do is right or wrong, the past me during the first Trump presidency would have been strongly agree. However, with Trump's second presidency, I do not have Trump deranged syndrome. I do not have TDS. However, I do strongly oppose the current administration itself, because they're doing a lot that I do not like. Because I'm also thinking about our fellow Americans. I'm not thinking party-wise here. I'm actually thinking of American-wise. So I'm going to go with strongly disagree, mostly because We just can't start cutting off people's health care. We can't start cutting off people from food stamps if they actually need it. We can't start cutting off the funding for education. Because I would rather my tax dollars be used for going to fund education. Especially on a statewide level, too. Moving forward from that one. No one chooses their country of birth, so it's foolish to be proud of it. Well, it actually depends. Example. I was born here in this country, the United States of America, and I'm actually proud to be born here. However, if we're talking about like foreign countries, like Mexico, Canada, and a few other countries as well, the point where it's actually bad, like third world type, I mean truthfully third world, then I would partially agree that it's foolish, but in general, it's not really foolish to be proud of where you're from. So I'm going to go with a disagree on that one, but it all really depends. Because truthfully, if there was a neutral option, I would select it. Our race has many superior qualities compared with other races. Since this is actually written in a more biased way, is it like race as in nationality or race as in race? Race within race as in like white, African American, Hispanic, Latino, stuff like that? Or is it basically like the United States of America versus Saudi Arabia or something like that? Otherwise, if we're just talking about stuff in general like that, I would go strongly disagree, because no race is inferior to other people. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Now this one, I've never really thought of like long and hard before, but lately, over the past couple of months, I've actually been thinking on it. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So speaking of which, before I would always see the Democrats as an enemy instead of a friend. However, the enemy to my enemy is a friend. So I'm against the Trump administration along with the MAGA Republicans. And I know that Democrats, even the Blue Dog Democrats, are pretty much against MAGA, so we do have something in common. Also against Trump, too. So, I do agree, technically speaking, and generally speaking, of course. Military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. Defies international law. Like, what is that really meaning? Like, what really is international law? Is it like laws put in place regarding NATO and the United Nations? Or is it something like that? However, if it is to bring peaceful relations between bickering countries, I would say agree, but it all depends on the country. However, I do have a America First mindset, meaning we need to help ourselves before we could help others. So, disagreeing in general, because there still leaves room for agree under certain circumstances. Like if an ally is asking for our help, we should rightfully help our allies, especially if they need it. There is now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment. I'm assuming this is basically, in old terms, like referring to The Onion and satirical news sources, but at the same time it could also be in reference to pretty much what we're seeing in the media between information and entertainment. Example, like The Daily Show or The Tonight Show or whatever it is. I don't watch that stuff, so I don't know. So I'm going to go and strongly disagree, because basically we need to know the right from wrong, especially for on how we're getting our news, because not all news can be believed. Now, the economy. We're talking attitudes here, not the FTSE index. I don't know what that is, but I'm going to try to remember the economy. People are ultimately divided more by class than by nationality. Again, if there was a neutral option, I would actually select it. Because I do feel that economically we're divided by class, but at the same time we are more ultimately divided by nationality. However, in this country, we have the high class, we have the middle class, and we have the low income class. And I fall into low income. However, in terms of the economy, yeah, I would actually say strongly, because the current market is pretty much more in favor of those with money. Especially even just to get business started. Controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. I would strongly agree, because if you think about it, along with the previous question, or the previous statement, proposition that I just answered, if we do control inflation, basically that will help the cost of goods from rising to where only the rich can afford them. However, if we do control it, anybody can afford it, whether they're rich or poor. Just like on how the current tariffs, the current situation regarding it, it's good, but it's also terrible at the same time. It's like companies should not be raising the cost of the goods due to the increase in tariffs. They should just eat it. Just like we eat away our money when we go buy items that we may or may not need, because what eats into our money is taxes. Because corporations can't be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they require regulations. I actually do agree that some environmental protection, it is great. In terms of mining, I am all for mining. If we need to mine something just to get the minerals and such, then yeah. Along with creating jobs, oh yeah, definitely. Because I'm from the Iron Range, up here in Minnesota. I may not live in the Iron Range anymore, but my heart will always be in the Iron Range. Which, to those that are watching that may not know, that is northeastern Minnesota. Because you got the Vermilion Range, the Mesabi Range, and the Cayuna Range. I'm from the Mesabi Range. Okay. From each, this is a Marxist idea. In theory, it's a good idea. However, fundamentally, it's a bad idea. Because this is more of a socialist statement by Karl Marx. So I would strongly disagree. Now, the freer the market, the freer the people. I generally agree with both of these. Agree and strongly agree. However, if I strongly agree, then controlling inflation, truthfully, would contradict the statement. However, I just generally agree, the freer the market, the freer the people, to basically create jobs, launch businesses, etc. However, with the inflation, it's also to help protect consumers as well. It's a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now a bottled, branded consumer product. In general, I would actually strongly disagree. However, the more I'm thinking about it, basically, in this country, we do have parts of the country in various states where the tap water isn't good and the people have to pretty much get their water through stores. So it's very sad that in this country there isn't clean water accessible to everybody. It's only accessible to some of our people. However, it's also not a sad reflection to those that actually do have clean and clean-ish water systems that filtrate the bad from the good. So on this, I really wish there was a neutral stance, but I would generally agree. However, it does say branded consumer product. So I will go with disagree. But if the branded consumer product was not included on this, I would just full on agree. Like just right here. Land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought and sold. Strongly disagree. Why should land have to be controlled and to be sold and bought by the government? Land, it should not be a commodity. However, there's a 50-50 stance on this, okay? But I'm more on the strongly disagree. So land shouldn't be a commodity. If I was more in favor of the government owning it, and I mean owning a lot of land to be bought and sold, I would strongly agree. However, strongly disagree, so that way it's mostly for the people. It's regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to their society. I would actually strongly disagree because it's our money. We can spend it how we want. But at the same time, it's not always smart on what we may or may not invest it on. but it's still our money at the end of the day. Protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade. This is basically another wording of, should the government intervene in the economy during trade? Well, yes and no. If we're looking at this as it was written, like, historically speaking, of course, traditional conservatism pretty much would actually favor this during the 1900s, maybe even the 1800s as well. However, this is more or less of a leftist form of social government control. But at the same time, yes, we do need protection during trade, but we don't at the same time. However, if it starts to hurt the American workers, then I would actually agree. I'm just going to go with agree, because whenever I hear protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade, I hear protectionism is definitely necessary. It all depends on the context of what's going on. Only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to its shareholders. Social responsibility. This is a Milton Friedman who actually said this. And conservatives, even libertarians, will actually agree. However, it can't be the only responsibility, because the responsibility of a company should be to deliver profit to its shareholders and to pay the workers. So I will just agree, so that way it leaves room for that. The rich are too highly taxed. Now, how much are the rich taxed in the USA? The richest Americans face high effective tax rates relative to their income, though these rates are significantly lower than their wealth-to-income ratios. For how much that they earn, I would actually disagree. Just generally disagree. Is because those percentages, I don't know what is seen as too high, per se. But those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards of medical care. This is one where I actually truthfully have a hard time on, because, example, should those that are wealthy, should they be able to pay just for medical care without insurance? Or is it like asking if they can get plastic surgery without the government paying for it? I would actually agree if it's the latter, but the question ain't really specific. Example, what is higher standards of medical care? What really is that? I'll change it to strongly agree the more I'm thinking about it. That's probably what it's referring to. Governments should penalize businesses that mislead the public. I actually do agree on that, but not strongly agree, because if the government's if the government isn't penalizing businesses for misleading the public, then that's pretty bad. Because no company should go unpunished, specifically if their products are misleading. And same with statements given by said companies. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. When it comes to monopolies, again, I'm neutral on it because monopolies are good, but they could also be bad. They're bad if they're wiping out competition. However, it can be good in the business sense of buying companies just to buy them and then to add more to their market. However, in a free market, we should be able to own and operate businesses as we choose. But there should also be restrictions on how much ownership can be given by big companies. So I'll go with agree. Abortion when the woman's life isn't threatened should always be illegal. Abortion when the woman's life is not threatened should always be illegal. With this statement alone, okay, my stance on abortion, it will never change. You can tell me that the pot is a train and I'm not going to believe it. Because my stance is rooted religiously. And my religious views like that will not change for anybody. So my stance on abortion is pro-life with exceptions. But this question alone, it's only specifying in a more prejudiced way and biased way for abortion. Like for the hardcore pro-life crowd that does not believe in exceptions. So I'm going to go with disagree. All authority should be questioned. Okay, what is considered by all authority? Because not all authority should be questioned, but some should be as well. Like the police, depending on the departments across the country, there's good cops and there's bad cops. The bad cops should always be questioned. However, if they're good cops, they should not be questioned. If it's in terms of authority as in like government figures, like our elected representatives, along with the president, then yeah, I could see that. However, I'm just going to go with agree, generally, that I really don't know specifically on what the all authority is. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Well, I do agree, especially when it comes to self-defense. Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters or museums that can't survive on a commercial basis. I actually do agree that because museums, They should not be funded by tax dollars unless they're a national museum or a statewide museum. But otherwise, museums in general, actually, I'm going to go strongly agree on that. Schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. Now, what is compulsory? Obligated or required. Schools should not make classroom attendance required. Well, it actually all depends on everything, really. However, I do agree, but I also disagree. So I'm going to go with disagree, because if you aren't in the classroom, or if you are now wanting to actually get good grades and pass, then basically you deserve to flunk and be held back. All people have their rights, but it is better for all of us that different sorts of people should keep to their own kind. You know, before I can actually look into what this is saying, for those of you that are questioning as well, this would be a perfect statement, or a perfect way to do it if y'all are questioning more than I can actually explain. Oh yeah. The only reason why I'm disagreeing instead of strongly disagree is because if we basically just surround ourselves with people that we don't necessarily agree with, but we're pretty much forced to, it ain't better. However, if you don't mind being around different sorts of people and different types, then, well, then that's on you. Because it all comes down to personal preference. Just like all people have their rights, but it's better for all of us that different sorts of people should keep to their own kind. I only disagree instead of strongly because, example, would I rather move to an all-white community? Hell no. Would I rather be the only white person in a black community? No. I would rather have the diversity of having more than one race around. However, it would be personal choice instead of keeping to our own kind. I'm not racist. I'm not. However, if it's a forced racial ideology standpoint, like example, people that say Black Lives Matter, but yet they're not actually hearing it from the actual black people themselves, then those people are deranged and lunatic to where they would strongly disagree, but at the same time strongly agree. But yeah. Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. Well, not all the time, no. In rare circumstances, if they're really acting up, and where it's actually warranted, then I would agree. But for the most part, I would disagree. It's natural for children to keep some secrets from parents. Strongly agree. It would be unnatural for children to not keep secrets. Possessing THC for personal use should not be a criminal offense. Strongly agree. The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future generation to find jobs. I actually do strongly agree, because basically, other than being a learning center, basically schooling is just equipping us and preparing us for the workforce, whether we know it or not. Hence why they really strongly encourage it during junior high, or also known as middle school, and high school too. People with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. Strongly disagree, because everybody should have the right to reproduce if they want to. The most important thing for children to learn is to accept discipline. It's not the most important, but it is important, because you need to have boundaries. However, the most important thing for a child to learn is how to treat and respect others. There are no savage and civilized peoples. There are only different cultures. I'm actually going to go with a disagree instead of strongly disagree, because there are savage and civilized peoples that are actually out there. We've all seen it, whether it's in person or through social media. Everybody is capable of being just straight out psycho. And then there are people that are just straight out civilized. Those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's support. In short, this is saying freeloaders should not expect society's support. Strongly agree. Just, if we see someone out in the street that's begging, most people would actually donate. However, we don't know if they're truthfully in need or if they are choosing to not support themselves by working. It all comes down to that. Just like people that don't want to get a job, that basically are just out there begging, they're making it hard for those that are truthfully disadvantaged and less fortunate to actually get the support that they need. Because now with the whole public perception is that everybody that's begging is basically a freeloader. And not all of those that are truly in need can actually get government help. When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. I would actually agree, because eventually keeping busy with cheerful things, it can temporarily help. However, it won't help in the long run. Example, if you're feeling depressed, try cleaning. But if your house is already clean, then I don't know what to explain for that. First-generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within their new country. Strongly agree. Strongly agree, because there's always going to be a certain percentage of Americans that do believe that they have a right to be prejudiced, which they do, but it's morally wrong. Example. We've all, even in person, we've seen racist tendencies from people. We've all seen how some people treat people, especially new immigrants. In today's political climate, a lot of people and a lot of Americans, they are being so racist. So racist and xenophobic to those that actually came here legally, especially through asylums, just because they're from third world countries, even if they're Middle Eastern. Do I respect any race coming into this country legally while still practicing their culture but assimilating at the same time? Yes, because the United States is a melting pot. And we just can't force a certain culture to stop practicing the culture that they were raised with. What's good for the most successful corporation is always ultimately good for all of us. Well, I want to agree, but not strongly agree, because what truthfully is good for all of us, and what really is the most successful corporations? Like example, this entire statement, what is it really saying? Which is why I'll agree to an extent. No broadcasting institution, however independent its context, should receive public funding. Agree. However, educational ones, like PBS, should strongly get that funding. But in general, I do agree that no broadcasting institution should receive public funding. Oh man, I'm taking way too long on this. I will try to hurry it up. Our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counterterrorism. I do strongly agree. A significant advantage of a one-party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress in a democratic political system. Strongly disagree. We have all seen in the United States government, a one-party state is basically where, let's just say, right now the Republicans, they have a trifecta. And that would be a one-party state, right, technically there. However, technically in the Senate, they don't have absolute control, which means there are some Republicans and some Democrats that actually will cause the numbers to not reach 60 votes. So, technically speaking, it's a disadvantage if one party totally controls the government instead of having a checks and balances where both parties can actually operate under one control. Because although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried. Strongly disagree. The death penalty should be the option for the most serious crimes. I agree. However, there are actually too many people that have been and still are being wrongly convicted for crimes they didn't even do. However, I'm actually going to go with disagree, because if we're speaking on an economic level too for government spending, it's actually more cheaper just to have them in prison for life. Actually, yeah, strongly disagree on that. The more I'm thinking about this on an economic government spending level. In a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and people below to be commanded. I do agree, but I not strongly agree. It all depends on the authority structure. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all. Now, what really is abstract art? Oh. No. It's still art, though, even if it doesn't make sense. Well, yes, in criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation, yes. Especially for the offenders to pretty much get their time served and receive the punishment for their crimes. And now, in relation to that, it's not necessarily a waste of time to rehabilitate some criminals. It's not necessarily a waste of time. The business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. I actually do agree, but I also disagree. However, I more disagree than agree on this. Because the writer and the artist pretty much need the business person and the manufacturer. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. Basically, it's saying mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be a housewife. No. I actually do strongly disagree on that. Almost all politicians promise economic growth, but we should heed the warnings of climate science that growth is detrimental to our efforts to curb global warming. Strongly disagree. Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. I would actually disagree. Actually, strongly disagree. If you got through that okay, you'll find these props on religion a breeze. I don't believe in astrology at all. Well, I generally disagree that you can't be moral without being religious. Because even Satan himself can have morals, or claim to have morals. Charity is better than Social Security as a means of helping the genuinely disadvantaged. We should always search the private charities first before we even think about going to government for help. However, I'm going to strongly agree on this. Some people are naturally unlucky. Nope, strongly disagree. It's important that my child's school instills religious values. Agree, but not strongly, because religious values, like example, treating people correctly and such. Yeah, I could see that. Oh boy, okay, the last page, but something that is a breeze. Sex outside of marriage is usually immoral. Strongly agree. A same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption. I genuinely don't care about gay marriage because love is love. I really don't care. But I do agree that they should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption. As long as they can pass the background checks without just generally being able to go out and adopt. Religiously, I do believe that porn should be banned, but at the same time, on the Americanized level, that it should be legalized for the adult population. What goes on in a private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. I wouldn't want the government in my bedroom telling me what I can and cannot do with a person that I'm involved with. However, at the same time, even if it's wrong, the government should not be able to penalize. You can think exactly what I could be going with this in terms of thinking, but I'm not for incest. But if some people want to do it, then it's no business of the state. But strongly agree, even though it'd be morally wrong. No one can feel naturally homosexual. Sexuality like this, it's born, but at the same time it's also influenced. I do believe that no one can feel naturally homosexual, because we as a human race, if we keep saying that homosexuality is natural, you're just lying to yourself and lying to other people, because we're actually all born heterosexual. However, certain types of trauma and indoctrination can feed into homosexuality. So, I'm going with agree. I'm not a homophobe, but at the same time I really don't care. I generally don't care because love is love. And these days, openness about sex has gone too far. I would actually strongly agree on this. Now to check our chart. And I am Libertarian Right, which actually does sound correct. We're going to be copying this in here, posting it, and asking the Brave browser on what it thinks. Wait a minute, did it not copy? Okay. Okay, and I'm pretty sure that y'all could actually see what I just typed, and basically that makes actual sense. An economic score of 4.63 places me on the center right to right of economic spectrum, favoring free markets, limited government intervention in the economy, and lower taxes. The social libertarian score of negative 2.26 indicates the libertarian stances on issues socially, such as supporting personal freedoms, civil liberties, skepticism towards state control over social matters like drug policy, privacy, and lifestyle choices. This combination, economically center-right and socially libertarian, aligns most closely with the U.S. Libertarian Party, whose platform emphasizes both fiscal conservatism and social liberalism. While mainstream Republicans are economically similar, they tend to be more socially conservative, authoritarian, making them less aligned with your social score. The Democratic Party is generally more economically left and only moderately socially libertarian. Your position reflects a classical liberal or libertarian conservative ideology, prioritizing both economic freedom and personal autonomy. Yeah, pretty much the Republican Party, aside from the Libertarian Party. But, yeah, we'll be doing a video on what is the Libertarian Party. But if you like this, and if you enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss any of my content. Peace.